Mr. Nitin Khanna, Associate Director, KPMG India, to kindly present his, uh, presentation. He is part of KPMG India strategy and operations practice and has experience in the areas of strategy design and implementation, market assessment, profitability improvement, business transformation, commercial due diligence, and valuation. And he has been advising oil and gas clients in India and is currently focusing on e-mobility and renewables. Uh, Nitin, requesting you to make the presentation.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I think with the second presentation, we have covered even more ground. But I think very valuable and relevant points raised by the chair as well as the speakers before me. What I'll try to do is make this a little more focused and share a few examples of how things have panned out in some of the global markets, the US specifically talking about China, and then where things stand in India, and try to, through this presentation, form a view of where India is headed. But before I dive into the pages here, what I want to share is at KPMG, we work very closely with most of the national oil companies, oil and gas companies like Indian Oil, BPCL, HPCL, super majors like BP, Shell in India as well as abroad. And we definitely see a sea change in the sentiment with regards to electric mobility in a short span of 12 to 16 months. If I go back to our discussions with them, 12 months, 16 months back, they were all aware of electric mobility, but there was a great deal of skepticism. In the last few months, given the kind of statements and the intent that has been outlined by the ministry, I think that sentiment has changed. And what's clearly emerging is that it's now a question of when can it happen rather than if it can happen. So the speakers before me mentioned that transportation sector is integral to the economic growth in a country, and that transportation sector, there's a consensus, is going to see a massive transformation in in the next 5, 10, maybe 15 years. And that transformation is actually led by 3, 4 themes. So one theme is, of course, the tightening of emission norms, for which most of us are here as we move from BS4 directly into BS6. The other theme that we haven't touched upon is definitely about autonomous vehicles. I think that is still a little far off, at least in the Indian context. And autonomous vehicles combined with ride sharing. KPMG in London does a lot of work on mobility, and an interesting insight that I would like to share from a recent survey done in London as well as broader Europe is that the millennials who are 18 to 34-year-olds in London and broader Europe, the number of driving licenses amongst these set of people is actually on a decline. And the reason is that these youngsters, the millennials, do not want to own cars. They want to simply, book a cab on their mobile phone or a tablet, sit at the back of the car comfortably, and scroll on their iPad or iPhone, whatever it is. So what that means is that number of vehicles on the road is possibly, gonna decline or not increase at the rate it has increased with the economic growth in the past. So that's the other theme, which is possibly not as active today, but come next year we may be talking about that as well. The third one is, and the most dominant one, is the electric mobility. So I'll jump into the pages with that context. To pleasure of a few and displeasure of others, what I thought I should lay down, what is the view of the energy sources to meet the energy requirements, standing today for 2040 across most of the leading consultants as well as publishers. So this is the energy basket. On the left hand side, you see the energy basket for the world, 2014 and 2040. On the right hand side, you see it for India. And there's one thing which is very, very clear. Oil and gas is here to stay. The share of oil and gas is likely to remain above 50%, or I should say fossil fuels, which is coal, oil and gas combined. And those will be the major sources of energy even up to 2040. What we see is that in the global energy basket, the share of coal and share of oil is declining, and that of gas is increasing. At the same time, there is a significant buildup of renewables that we are seeing. It's called as other renewables because it doesn't include biomass, but it's largely solar and wind put together. For India, the picture looks quite different. In India, given the stage of growth we are in, increasing urbanization, incomes, all of that, the share of coal in the energy basket is going to increase. The share of oil is going to increase. The share of gas as well as renewables. And all this is coming largely at the expense of biomass, which is in the rural areas the source of energy. So the key message here is that oil and gas and coal will still be the key sources of energy even in 2040 for the world as well as for India. So things are changing, but hell is not breaking loose. Then, so globally, where things are. As of 2015, there were about 1.25 million plus electric or plug-in hybrid cars put together on the road across the world, which is essentially the numbers on the left-hand side on the chart. Yeah. Of the total vehicles on the road, about 60% were there in US and China alone, which was US being the largest market with about 400,000 electric cars on the road. This is population. In China, about 300,000 electric cars. However, in terms of penetration, which is a proportion of sales in any given year, the lead has been taken by Nordic countries. So Norway, every fourth car sold in Norway in 2015 was an electric car. In Sweden, every 10th car sold was an electric car. So in terms of adoption, Nordic countries have taken a lead, and this has largely been on account of very high subsidies being offered by the governments in those countries, which have been highest, upwards of 50 to 60% of the sticker price, or more commonly the purchase price of the vehicle. In other countries like US and China, it's been a combination of factors, both supply side and demand side, as well as regulation. Things around, road tax waivers, toll waivers, parking privileges, lane driving privileges, all have contributed to increasing number of electric vehicles in these markets. On the two-wheeler side, which is the chart on the right-hand side, what we see is two-wheelers are largely there in China, India, Taiwan, these kind of Asian markets. There are 230 million electric two-wheelers in China, 230 million. In India, there are about 4 lakh electric two-wheelers, and these are numbers as of 2015. It took the world overall, as mentioned here, about 5 to 7 years to put over 1 million electric cars on the road. The next 1 million got added in less than 12 months. So as on today, there are upwards of 2 million. What this tells us is that technology, more often than not, has taken us by surprise. And technology-led or technology-driven changes happen much, much faster than we often anticipate. uh, you know, the mobile phones would be an easy comparison, although not directly comparable, but something to consider. Most of the major OEMs, of course, have announced plans to, have electric vehicles in their portfolio, be it, of course, new age ones like Tesla and Nissan Motors, who are essentially driving this trend, but all the existing ones, BMW, Chevrolet, Daimler, Volkswagen, Volvo, you name it, they're talking about significant number of electric vehicle sales, the contribution in their overall sales being there, you know, anywhere in the time period of 2020 to 25 to 2030. So this is here to stay, and there is commitment across the supply side. I thought it's very relevant to talk about the case of China, which has seen a massive offtake of electric vehicles. And to put some numbers in perspective by segments, so in two-wheelers, as I said, there are 230 million vehicles on the road today, which is about 40% of their total two-wheelers. In 2015 alone, about 75% of all new two-wheelers sold in the market were actually electric. So three-fourth are actually electric two-wheelers, right? That's a massive impact. In four-wheelers, they have two types of categories. One is the low-speed electric car, which is something not really a car. It's a smaller than nano, made of fiber body. There are manufacturers in every nook and corner, and that number has also grown at very high CAGR. So about 70 to 80% CAGR over the 5-year period. Then you have the proper, car, which is hatched to anything bigger than that. That has seen a CAGR of 200%. So growth has come on that side as well. And buses. China has more than 10 electric OEMs for manufacturing electric buses. So that shows the readiness that is there from the supply side in a market like China. More than 200% CAGR for electric buses. And how has this happened? This has largely been, I would say if there's a single most important factor, that is the government push. That is the policy intervention, which, given the style of governance in a country like China, seems doable. But would something similar to that be replicable in India? Question mark. If you look at the two-wheelers, China put a ban in 13 cities on sales of electric two-wheelers all of a sudden. And in the others also similar curbs were put. For four-wheelers, they introduced a quota system for the license plates. So you have to bid for it, which increases the cost of getting a license for an internal combustion engine vehicle. At the same time, these smallish, less than a car kind of four-wheelers were actually cheaper than the conventional fossil fuel vehicles. So the economics of acquiring and running one worked out favorably for consumers. So that was a combination of incentive as well as economics. The third category is the proper car segment. There again, a lot of limitations on the license plates. And for the electric four-wheelers, there were no such limitations. For actually the smaller ones, you did not even require a license plate. You could run that without a license plate. For the others, you could get it free of cost. You don't have to wait in a queue, much like Singapore. And buses, of course, there have been greater subsidies by the government in China, about to the extent of 50% of the sticker price. So it's been a combination of the policy. It's been the combination of readiness of the supply side. If the supply is not ready, even if the policy is there, people can't buy it. So there has been supply side readiness. And of course, in some cases, the economics have worked out much better. So with that thought, this is about where we stand in India. Of course, very, very negligible share across the vehicle segments. And on the bottom of the page, you see what the government of India and ministry have been talking about, laying down a very, very positive intent to go electric. I'll not talk about the need for it because that's been talked about by earlier speakers. But there is action which is happening across different elements. So be it more and more OEMs announcing electric vehicle manufacturing, to Maruti, Denso, others forming a consortium to set up battery plant, other players also looking to set up battery plants. There are NTPC, ABB, Tata Power who are doing pilots for charging stations. Government is talking about a new policy coming out. There are pilots happening in Nagpur, which are being led by the aggregators, the Uber equivalents, Uber and Uber equivalents, about making this a reality. So there is a lot of talk which is happening, and some supporting action as well. Here, what I thought was I'll share some perspective on what are the challenges in the entire value chain. Some of which was touched upon. A question was asked as well, very relevant question. So on the battery side, of course, it's been said 40 to 50% of the cost of electric vehicle comes from the battery. Do we have battery manufacturing in India yet? The answer is no. Whatever vehicles are being made, the battery is being imported from China, and it's fairly expensive. One is the first time acquisition cost of the vehicle, but other is the replacement of battery during the life cycle of the vehicle, during the life cycle of the ownership of the vehicle. The battery is as expensive as 4 to 5 lakhs for an 8 lakh kind of a vehicle which is available on the Indian roads, which is electric, and that is recommended by the OEM to be replaced every 4 to 5 years. So you're talking about buying an 8 to 9 lakh worth vehicle and replacing the battery worth 4 to 5 lakhs at the end of 4 years. So the total cost of ownership just doesn't work out. And what we have seen, looking at technology-led changes, not just in automotive but beyond, it has to be a combination of policy and economics for things to move from niche to a mass adoption kind of a model. So that is something which needs to be figured out. On the OEM side, of course, currently we have only one OEM which makes electric cars in India. On the car side, there are a number of there on the two-wheeler side though. There are others who are talking about it, but what's the capacity that they have given the demand numbers or the overall numbers that the government of India is talking about? So that needs to be considered. Electricity provider, I don't see that to be much of a challenge. Charging stations, of course, we know about it, and battery services. I'll try to address that question which got raised some time back on the battery swapping as well. So what I thought is to make it more focused, share some thoughts on how actually things may pan out given the challenges which are there in India, taking a few cues from other parts of the world. If you look at two-wheelers, actually electric two-wheelers came into the market much, much before. They came around 2007, 2008. There was actually a good growth rate of electric two-wheelers in India. And then, it just tapered off and then they just vanished from the market. And the feedback that the customers gave was, by the way, these were all lead acid battery-based two-wheelers, not lithium-ion battery-based two-wheelers. There were a number of quality concerns with regards to these vehicles which were made available. They would break down often. You would not find, repair mechanics, roadside mechanics, because the technology was different. and the lead acid battery also, of course, needs to be replaced and charged. There were also issues about stealing the lead acid batteries being stolen from the two-wheeler. So, however, can things happen on the two-wheeler side? And by the way, two-wheelers consume a bulk of the gasoline in India, right? So a bulk of the gasoline is actually in two-wheelers, and if adoption happens in two-wheelers, the way it happened in China with a stroke of a pen or whatever, things could really change for the oil and gas companies as well as for the auto OEMs. In the four-wheeler space, there is a clear fleet and individual ownership. The reason things have happened or appear to be happening more on the fleet side, of course, a couple of issues were mentioned a few minutes back. One is of the perception that it increases awareness, it shows the intent of the government. Other is the ease of implementing it, given that you can put in regulation easily without much outrage of the general public. But the third most important factor is actually the economic factor. The number of miles in a given year that a fleet vehicle does compared to an individual vehicle, there's a stark difference. So because the acquisition cost of the vehicle is high, for the economics to work out comparable to a low cost ICE, the more miles you drive, the better are the economics of an electric vehicle to an ICE vehicle. So the fleet vehicle does more than 20-25 kilometers in a year versus a personal vehicle which would do, depending on individual usage pattern, maybe 5,000, maybe 8,000 or less. So the economic angle is very, very crucial when we talk about a select adoption to a real mass adoption. So that's why things are happening on the fleet side. In China as well, just to share from work that KPMG does in China, most of the Uber, so the Uber guys in India as well as in China, these are the new people who are coming in from tier 3, tier 4 cities, buying up a new vehicle and starting to run in metro cities. The similar trend is there in China, and you can't get a license plate for an ICE. So most of the new vehicle purchases which are happening in China by the Uber drivers have to be electric. They don't have a choice. And again, the economics work out much, much better, given that they have strong incentive program as well. On the buses, of course, it was rightly mentioned, intercity buses, would mean that you will need to set up infrastructure, charging infrastructure at, so many different places along the route, the longer route of the buses. But when it comes to intra-city, within the city limits, what you need is charging hubs. You don't need to, set up charging stations at every place. There are fixed routes from point A to point B. A bus makes a halt anywhere between 30 to 50 minutes to deboard and reboard the next set of passengers. And that time is enough to fast charge the bus and be enough that it can do the next trip. So you need single consolidated large charging hubs to make this possible. So that's where the adoption can happen. Before that, on the battery swapping also, I would like to touch upon that. While we are talking about battery swapping and the individuals paying the cost of the vehicle less the battery, that means that given the cost of the battery, a new organized large player with significant financial muscle will have to come into this space, who would buy so many batteries, manage and run the inventory of these, be able to provide the service, be able to provide financing, etc. So a lot needs to be done to make battery swapping a reality. The other practical consideration is we saw a photograph of swapping happening in a two-wheeler, but think of a four-wheeler, think of a bus. You need modular design, which is not there. Let's assume modular design comes in. You can't have one person lift a battery in a car and just replace it. It's it can weigh as much as 200 kgs, 300 kgs in a car. It can be much, much heavier in a bus. So you will actually need organized forklift operations to be able to, swap it. And who bears the cost of it? Given the way aftermarket for automotive is structured in India, it's essentially a roadside mom and pop operation. Do you expect a mom and pop guy to, own an inventory, make that capital investment, provide for safety, security of those batteries? So these are unanswered questions which need to be answered before a concept like battery swapping can actually become a reality. So I see the counter ticking really fast. Um, I'll just conclude possibly with something on battery technology. We are talking about lithium ion. There's a lot of research going on across different technologies, including improving lithium ion battery technology. Some technical experts, and I'm not one of those, have serious doubts about the safety of lithium ion battery. So there is a question on whether lithium ion is the battery for the future, or it's going to be the battery technology for the next 10 to 15 years, and after that maybe generation 2 or generation 3 battery technologies may actually emerge, which may be safer, may not require charging at all. So there are technologies where you can simply replace some elements of the battery and it is as good as a fully charged new battery. So battery technology is a key or the single most important consideration to watch out for. What we need to achieve is be able to pack more cells and hence more power in the same volume, and pack more cells and more power in the same unit weight, so that we make the battery smaller and lighter. And that's when the problems related to range anxiety and all of those actually go away. And in doing that, decrease the cost of it through technology improvement as well as through scaled up manufacturing, which essentially brings the cost of these vehicles down and makes them comparable to ICE for things to shift from closed door conversations to actually talk of the town. So I think that's it from my side, and